Image Anomalies, Curiosity Rover on Earth, Part 2. This presentation is the second in a three-part series that continues the investigation into the authenticity of the raw images on NASA's website. Part 1 documented several examples of after-image editing, objects added to images, and inexplicable changes to the Curiosity rover's equipment. The intriguing images in this study moves the question from why are the images being altered to what is it they don't want us to see. All images in this presentation are exclusively from NASA and JPL sources. In this somewhat dark image, we observe Curiosity passing through sandy terrain. When we lightened the image, the middle right section where the red arrow is pointing, we can clearly see a gray box has been digitally added to obscure part of the image. What is under the box that NASA doesn't want anyone to see? These are two comparable images taken by the front hazard cameras, each with the robotic arm just a few feet away. Curiously, when we get a closer look, the image on the right is blurry and looks strange compared to the image on the left, which shows a clearer view of the wrist joint. When a filter is applied, it is easy to observe the attempts to obscure the equipment digitally. What is it about the wrist joint that NASA doesn't want to be seen? This side-by-side comparison of the other side of the wrist joint is clearer and easier to observe. To the trained eye, it is readily apparent that an odd object has been added to the equipment in the image on the right. A second comparison with a color image taken by the mass cam confirms that the object in the right image is not a part of the equipment and should not be there. This close-up image of the DRT, or dirt removal tool, shows an interesting anomaly. When compared to a color image in the bottom right corner, a curious black object has appeared that should not be there. When we look in the color image, we can see that there should be a straight metal bracket. In the black and white image, the metal bracket is broken, and part of it is being obscured by a black object. This black object is to trick the viewer into thinking that this is the other brush. It is not. This image, taken by the left navigation camera, provides an example of the technique of blending the equipment into the foreground with the Martian surface in the background, which has been done frequently in the raw images. In the close-up on the right, we can see how a pile of dirt actually eclipses the two wires from Curiosity's UHF channel, which is 5 feet off the ground. The color image on the left shows the two wires that are closely banded together. One is darker than the other. But we can see over here that the darker wire can still be seen in contrast to the much darker Martian soil behind it. But when we come down here, we look at the bottom loop of the wires, and they are not easily visible because they are obscured behind the pile of dirt. Using a filter, we can see the raised pile of dirt in front of the wires. This color image of Curiosity's right rear wheel gives a clear view of the suspension bracket and the Martian regolith below. This image from Sol 1482 shows the same perspective taken by the navigation camera, except there's something odd that requires further investigation. When we do a side-by-side comparison, the images are quite different. In the image on the right, we cannot see a clear edge of the right side of the bracket. Something has been either attached to it, or with additional after-image editing, it's difficult to determine which. We can no longer see the separation of the equipment from the Martian surface as we can in the color image on the left. Here is a second comparison with a black and white image to highlight the differences. Even with a darker image, the edge of the equipment should be seen. It appears something has been done to obscure the surface below. The enlargement does show after image editing, in addition to whatever material was placed on the surface that doesn't match the ground above and below the material. This could have been a combination of digital editing in addition to a material being placed. In this example from Sol 1281, the equipment cannot be seen due to the dark shadow projecting over the equipment. When we get a closer look and a filter is added to lighten the image, we can see once again that part of the image has been intentionally obscured. What is there that we are not to see? This particular bracket that we've just been looking at has been completely obscured, as is the rest of the area behind. We should have a clear view of this part of the bracket. A second comparison shows the correct way the equipment should appear. In the left image, we can clearly see the definition between the equipment and the surface below. In the image on the right, the bracket cannot be seen. This is the organic materials check display. Let's take a closer look. In both the front and overhead views, we can observe that the display is smooth and unobscured. In this image, it is curious how the images on the bottom show a dark wedge-shaped object is now laying on it. These two similar images showing Curiosity's robotic arm extended were taken at the same location 2 weeks apart. The right one has a curious anomaly. The image on the left shows the robotic arm extended, holding up the turret with it balanced on the XSPS. It is not as it appears. To prove the point, rocks have been identified and numbered. The rock that the turret is resting on is rock number 3. Rock number 2 is directly behind it, and the wrist joint is resting on rock number 1. In this image, we can establish the correct location of the wrist joint. On the right are two images of the same location with and without the wrist joint. The wrist joint's presence can be established by two sets of rocks, one in front, 1, 2, 1, 2, and then 2 in the rear, 1, 2, 1, 2. Here we can see the wrist joint is resting in between both of these sets of rocks. Here's rock 3 again comparing exactly where the XSPS was resting. Again, same location where this is connecting. And we know that Curiosity's upper arm is approximately 3 feet long. So we know from rock 3 to rock 2 is approximately 3 feet. And just visually looking at it, rock 1 is probably 2 feet away as well. So how do we have the wrist joint over here sitting on this rock and the XPS over here? That would have meant they would have been separated with 4 feet in between them. This is a close-up of Curiosity's front right wheel, but it contains something that should not be there. In this side-by-side comparison of the same wheel, we can see a distinct difference between the two. The image on the right contains a strip of clear plastic that should not be there. It is noteworthy that the image on the left was taken well over a year after being on service in Mars, and the wheel is covered in a layer of dirt, as would be expected. The image on the right was taken 8 months later, and it is perfectly clean with no dirt anywhere. Here, our investigation moves to the front of Curiosity's equipment deck. In this right navigation camera image, we have a clear view looking down, seeing from the top view of the organic material display. The display contains several round canisters, and the top one is flush against the deck, with no space at all in between. Unlike the others, that there is just a slight amount. This image taken by the left navigation camera shows a different perspective from behind. It shows that same canister now has significant clearance from the deck. Curiosity's navigation cameras are located approximately a foot apart on the mast and do show different perspectives and angles. But it cannot create space where it does not exist. How do we account for the differences in the space and clearance in these two images? This one is completely pressed against the deck, and this one allows us to see straight down to the Martian surface. This image from Sol 43 shows very little of Curiosity, but it contains an incredible anomaly. These two images were taken by the same camera. In the close-up on the right, we can see a rock has been placed on top of Curiosity's equipment. A small platform had been added to support the rock. In the image on the right, with the filter added, we can see where a long digital rectangle was added to obscure the equipment changes. In this image, we can observe once again the technique of blending the equipment in the foreground with the Martian surface in the background. In the close-up on the right, we can see how an intrusion into the space where the wires are by an angled object comes in the foreground of the wires. Here's another example utilizing the same technique. An inexplicable round reflective bolt with a square base has been placed on the platform just underneath the wires. We can see that the area was contoured to create a platform and layered to match the background to rest the metal object on. The metal object is not a part of Curiosity. Where did it come from? And how did it get there? Numerous images have been presented showing obvious signs of after-image editing. Perhaps more significantly, several examples were shown of physical alterations to the Curiosity rover. Is this proof the raw images are staged here on Earth? You decide.